Well, it was Neil Young, the famously pessimistic singer-songwriter, who used to introduce one of his songs in concert by saying, "Here's a song guaranteed to bring you right down. It's called Don't Let It Bring You Down." I feel a bit that way this morning. There's so much depressing news around that I'd like to try and cheer us up, but alas, I can't. An appalling story I heard this week involves the famous Australian singer Deborah Conway and the attempts by people in the arts community in Sydney to prevent her performing here in August. Deborah will be launching her new album with Willie Ziegler, Songs You Can Trust, at the Camelot Lounge in Marrickville on August the 17th. Yet so deranged and unhinged are some people that they are trying to have the concert cancelled, even fellow artists who should hang their heads in shame. One such person is Alicia Gardner, the actress from shows like Offspring, who this week wrote to the Camelot Lounge in Marrickville, sneering at Deborah Conway's supposed Zionism, which simply means Deborah supports the right of Jews to have their own homeland, and then accusing her of supporting genocide and making vile comments about children before calling the venue's support for Deborah Conway abhorrent and demanding the gig be cancelled. Yes, that's Alicia Gardner. Deborah Conway has written to Alicia Gardner's agent, BGM, to complain, but they have washed their hands of the matter. Not good enough, in my opinion. My advice, as always, if you support Deborah Conway, book your tickets to her new shows. Do it today. Go to the website for the Camelot Lounge in Marrickville. This boycotting of Jewish people for their political views is precisely what Gillian Siegel despaired of and wrote about in her recent report on anti-Semitism. But it is typical of how the left obsess endlessly and feverishly over the plight of the Palestinians. It's a tragic plight, yes, for sure. But in my opinion, for what it's worth, it's entirely self-inflicted. With endless protests at universities, with these idiotic actors wearing keffirs, with virtue-signalling politicians and the media endlessly talking about Gaza, but seeming to be weirdly disinterested in the genuine genocide of the Druze taking place in Syria this week. I apologise in advance for this distressing footage, which you've had to blur much of it out. In this footage, it appears that a group of Syrian jihadists are forcing Druze civilian men at gunpoint to leap off their own balconies to their deaths. And then the jihadists cheer about it. There's plenty of footage coming out of these massacres, some of it on your screens now. The last time I saw footage as distressing as what I've seen was, of course, the horrific footage that came out of southern Israel on the morning of October 8th in 2023. Two very different countries, two very different sets of victims, and two very different circumstances. But the motivation behind the perpetrators of these atrocities is the same: radical, jihadist Islamism. The same motivation we also saw several years ago with the appalling and terrifying treatment by ISIS of the Yazidis, another minority group in Syria. Women sex slaves in cages, men being decapitated in front of the cameras, and so on. It was horrific and barbaric beyond belief.
He says 84 members of his extended family are missing and feared dead. They were kidnapped by ISIS. Another man approached with terror in his eyes. He says he saw many bodies abandoned and people committing suicide rather than be captured.
That was Syria back under ISIS, but back to what is happening in Syria this week. The Syrian government recently changed hands, with the former ISIS commander al-Jilani overthrowing the dictator Assad. Al-Jilani, formerly known as Ahmed al-Sharaa, has a long and bloody history as an al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorist. Put that on your CV. He set up the al-Nusra Front, for instance. But recently he swapped his jihadi clothes for more modern Western attire and even met with Donald Trump, promising to join the Abraham Accords. Whether or not that is all part of the Islamist strategy of taqiyya, meaning deception, I guess we are now finding out. Khalifa is an Israeli Druze activist speaking here after the horrific massacre that allegedly took place in a Druze hospital by al-Jilani's forces last week.
The things that I heard today shook my existence to the soul, knowing that people that basically look like me and you could go and do things like I heard on children in sacred places, on the beheading and all those. I simply can't really grasp that, and I find myself, being reporting on what I'm seeing and just cracking and start to cry, knowing that, oh my God, I'm so lucky that I live in Israel.
Then there is this poor girl who tells an equally heartbreaking story as she pleads desperately for someone to come to her family's aid and her village's aid, and she pleads with her tormentors to spare her. This was this week.
من مين هدول مجرمين رح يقتلوكم بعدين؟ جايكم الدور كلكم، والله جايكم. ما تفكروا انه هدول الاوباش رح يرحموا حدا فينا اصلا. من شان الله عم نقلكم.
The only government in the world that appears willing to come to the Druze' help is, of course, Israel. And this week, Israeli military strikes hit Damascus, much to the surprise of one Syrian newsreader.
وزير الدفاع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي إسرائيل كاتس إن الجيش سيواصل مهاجمة قوات.
Another Syrian woman, Rowan Osman, is a Sunni Muslim born in Damascus, brought up to hate the Jewish people, but who has now become a passionate Arab Zionist.
It seems that the world is siding with terrorists and justifying their actions. The world is discussing why people are literally dying. This is insane. I am the only crazy person who went on Israeli television and said, I know al-Jilani is a former Qaeda member, but give the Syrian people a chance. If he's willing to sign a peace agreement, do it. Do it. People thought I'm supporting a terrorist. I feel so sorry for the Syrian people, and I do not know how I should help them. The only thing I can do is raise awareness and thank the Israelis. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and shame, shame on this world.
Shame on this world indeed. Melanie Phillips, my good friend, and one of the greatest writers and thinkers on everything to do with the Middle East. You can read her on Melanie Phillips' Substack. As always, sums up the situation accurately and without pulling her punches. She wrote this week, quote, the hypocrisy, the double standards and the malevolence are off the scale. Syrian government forces carried out a 4-day massacre this week of the Druze minority in Suwaida, a Druze town in southern Syria. An estimated 300 Druze were slaughtered in a series of barbaric atrocities perpetrated by troops loyal to the new Syrian president, al-Jilani. There were reportedly beheadings and rapes. Children were murdered in front of their parents. Yet, as Melanie writes, the likes of Amnesty and Human Rights Watch were silent. Demonstrators in the West who have been screaming about Israel's so-called genocide in Gaza for the past 21 months were conspicuously absent from the streets and campuses. Even the Trump administration, writes Melanie, bafflingly described what happened as a misunderstanding. Melanie points out all the new Syrian president had needed to do was trim his beard, don some sharply cut Western clothes, replace his nom de guerre, and declare that he wanted to join the Abraham Accords, and he was miraculously transformed from a depraved fanatic into an invaluable regional player. Several years ago, so that was Melanie. Several years ago, my colleague here at Sky, Laura Jays, and I visited a beautiful Druze hilltop village in northern Israel, and we were treated to amazing hospitality, even more amazing food. The Druze are a fascinating and ancient people who have their own unique religious beliefs, which interestingly include reincarnation. Our hostess told us that she knew who her husband had been reincarnated as and what village in Syria he now lived as a boy. It was a fascinating afternoon. But the Druze religion is anathema to the jihadist mindset. just as are the religious beliefs of the Jewish people, and do not forget it for 1 second, so too are the beliefs of all Christians and the non-religious beliefs of all Western atheists and agnostics, all Western ideologies, including in particular gays, queers, and transgender beliefs. Radical Islam will not tolerate a single one of us. We are no different to the Jews or to the Druze. Don't say you weren't warned.